There we go. You're going to give us some reflections on these particular issues, but also out of the work that you've been doing on your upside governance work.
Yeah, is this working?
It certainly should be.
So you can hear me.
It doesn't necessarily amplify the room, but it's crucial for the fact that we're being streamed.
I was going to offer a few reflections really on moving from some of these really fascinating, I think, research findings to practice, and in particular what it means for the role that external actors can and can't play. Because I agree very much with what David said in the introduction, which was that what we should be aspiring to do is to do a bit better. But actually I think that's probably more ambitious than it sounds. And first, very obviously, there's a huge gap, isn't there, between this research and the rather comfortable external narrative that most development agencies have, which is that aid can directly and simultaneously support poverty reduction, achievement of MDGs, democracy, rights, rule of law, build institutional capacity, fight corruption. And then by contrast, we've got this research, and I think a growing volume of other research that's saying, actually there's no evidence that all these good things go together, that we need more politically informed, more context-sensitive, less supply-driven approaches. We need to build on what's there. We need to take a pragmatic approach to clientelism. Can imagine my going to Andrew Mitchell and saying we need a more pragmatic approach to clientelism. Aid can be part of the problem. Elite interests matter, and this is a really hard sell. What to me is interesting, however, is that despite some very strong institutional disincentives to pursue this agenda, actually what I see is growing interest among serious donor agencies in political analysis, and that includes very recently the European Commission, UNDP, NORAD, the Bank, the Netherlands, CEDA, even, it's rumoured, the French, but I haven't pursued that rumour, as well as DFID, because experienced practitioners actually know that politics is central to development. But my second point is that even if political leaders of agencies bought this, I think it's actually really hard to know how external actors might become politically savvy facilitators of institutional change. I think that's really challenging. I mean, how can they engage in ways that empower local actors? How can external actors start to shift institutional incentives of local powerful players? How do you operate pragmatically within a clientelistic system? How can you judge the likely impact of your interventions? And by that I mean not just the short-term results, but the long-term cumulative impact of aid on local institutional capacity and incentives. I think these are really tough things to confront external actors, including donors, with. What I do think is that we're beginning to get some bits and pieces of evidence from recent research that help. And I will just mention a few of the things that have come out of the research from the Centre for the Future State, on which an upside-down view of governance is actually what it's called, is based. And then some things that I think are coming out of the Africa Power and Politics programme that are also really interesting. From the Centre for the Future State, I think that has highlighted aspects of political context and process that seem particularly important in terms of their ability to support progressive change. And particularly the idea that bargaining and constructive bargaining between state and society around common interests is central, and the role of informal institutions is central. Those all seem to me to be ideas that a practitioner could draw on and point to things like the importance of action at a global level that might start to change the behaviour of OECD governments and businesses, which in turn could have an impact on incentives of political and economic elites in poor countries. And by that I'm thinking about things that, like using market power to curtail illegal logging, global financial regulation, potential for changing the international regime on narcotics, those sort of big things that indirectly could have some powerful impact on incentives. Some ideas that are central to that IDS research around the tax relationship and the potential for bargaining and constructive bargaining around taxation, and some ideas about the importance of common interests between different powerful groups, and particularly common interests between politicians and investors in more productive investment and economic growth. So those are kind of, I suppose they're big ideas, but one can see how you might translate them into different kinds of approaches in policy. And there are others, obviously. The way you design program has an effect. I think the voluntary partnership agreements under the European Forestry project is actually a very nice example of designing an intervention in a way that does empower local actors. So there are some ideas you can take from that. Also, the work that ODI has done in the past on aid modalities and that, their impact on institutions and incentives is really important. And then just let me pick out from the what I know about the Africa Power and Politics programme a couple of things that seem to me to have some real insights to offer policymakers, both local policymakers and external policymakers, about what's involved in building on what's there. Because this research combines that kind of detailed, fine-grained investigation into local level institutions that work for poor people, with at least the ambition and I hope the prospect of identifying some commonalities across contexts. So for example, pointing to the importance of a coherent vision for local policy makers and the damage that constantly changing donor fashions can have, particularly in aid-dependent countries, I think is really important and it's actionable. Pointing, as Tim mentioned, to the importance of top-down pressure to improve bureaucratic performance, not just relying on demand-side pressure for accountability. That too, I think, is really important. And the third thing that to me came out of the paper, it's a very nice paper that David wrote last August on emerging kind of findings, is again the importance of locally anchored institutions, but also the potentially damaging impact of donor attempts to strengthen civil society organisations in one way or another, because they can increase inequality, corruption, weaken capacity for collective action. And this too is actionable. It's not easy, and there will be a big pushback from that bit of the development business that has some strong vested interests in this area of work. But nevertheless, these are all things that are potentially actionable. So, I mean, where does this leave us? On a bad day, I see the glass half empty, to be honest with you. I'm struck by the growing divergence between that external narrative and what is an increasingly well-informed and sophisticated debate that's taking place within the main donor agencies. And it is. It's the quality of that debate is high. And I think about this whole big development industry busily working against the grain, right? And then, so I have to finish on an optimistic note. On a good day, when I see the glass half full, I think, well, maybe there are some pretty useful messages here for external actors beginning to emerge from research, that there is a growing number of practitioners receptive to them, that there is scope for more honest, better informed debate externally as well as within agencies. And maybe actually the single most important thing would be to appoint more staff in donor country offices who really understood local context, both at a national level and at a subnational level, and give them some freedom to experiment. And maybe they'd come up with some good ideas that could catch on.
Great. Thank you very much.